Hey everyone, it's Blar, and in this video, I wanted to talk to you about vendor available currencies in the early acts, as there are differences in what's available from each act to each act. This matters for speedrunning because sometimes you might need to pick up a particular currency that's only available, let's say, in Act 1 versus Act 2. So, let's get into it. So the Flask or skill gem vendor in each act will sell non-quality related currency. In Act 1, the currency that is sold will be stuff that makes or manipulates blue items, such as transmutes, alterations, or augments. Act 2 will have a completely separate a set of vendor available currencies and will not sell transmutes, alterations, or augments at all. Instead, it will focus on socket currency such as chromatics, fusing, jewelers, and also reversion currency such as regrets and scours. In Act 3, what will happen is essentially all the currency from Act 1 and Act 2 will become available, and in addition to that currency, elks and chance orbs will now be sold as well. This pattern will continue from Act 3 and beyond, meaning that once you get to Act 3, essentially the Flask/skill gem vendor will always sell all the non-quality related currency that it can. One thing to note is that all Flask and skill gem vendors will always sell portal skulls regardless of the act. Here is Nessa's window in Act 1. As you can see, there's only sort of 3 currencies you can get here: a transmute, alteration, and augment. One thing to note is that the location of these particular currencies can move around a little bit depending on how much the vendor has to sell and where those items are located. Sometimes this augment might be over next to the alteration. Sometimes these two will be stacked over here near the portal scroll. It really just depends on sort of how the item set is generated for the vendor. As you can see here, here's Act 2 Yina. You'll see that there is no currency related to blue items here. You don't see the transmutes, augs, or alterations. Instead, you see the socket currency through the fusings, jewelers, chromatics, and then you see the reversion currency with the scour and the orb of regret. What you'll see here in Act 3 Clarissa is that you'll see the addition of the elk and the chance orbs, and then you'll see the rest of the currency that was available in Act 1 and Act 2. Now, once you start getting to the Act 3 and beyond vendors, the currency is always going to be roughly in the same order. Sometimes you might see the elk, chance orb, and regret moved around a little bit. But more or less, sort of once you get to this portal scroll, you'll always see the chromatic, fusing, and jeweler right after it. And then before the portal scroll, you'll see preceding it the augment, scour, and alteration. So it can sort of just help you reference where it is. Sometimes this alteration might be grouped with a transmute on a different line, but this is how they'll typically be ordered for the most part from now on. So here's an actual example of where the differences in what the vendors sold ended up mattering in a speedrun that I did. I was playing a caster and I wanted to do 220 crafts on wands, and I only had 1 alteration, but I had 4 augments. And in case you don't know, 4 augments will sell for an additional alteration. I thought I'd be able to do that at the Act 2 town, and lo and behold, once I get to the Act 2 town, there is no alteration in sight. And I'm like, what's going on here? I'm super confused. Long and short of it is I didn't realize you could only get it at Act 1 at the time. So I just ended up not getting a second 20 craft and just having 1, even though I had the currency through extra augs to be able to afford to do this recipe. And I couldn't use the augs elsewhere, for example on movement speed boots, since I already had them. Now, there is also quality currency at the weapon and armor vendors, and this can be relevant too because essentially only Tarkley will sell scraps and only Groose will sell whetstones. And this can make a big deal if you're on a weapon-based class or attack-based class, because it can limit when you can do the rustic recipe. Oftentimes, you'll find a lot of scraps and runs, but you can't convert those scraps into whetstones in Act 1. You have to wait until Act 2. Now, one thing to note is that in Act 3, Hargan will start selling glass blower baubles. This really isn't super relevant because you're not going to have whetstones to afford to sort of make or buy this currency because it costs 7 whetstones. And even if you did, you really wouldn't want to because you don't get much benefit from a bauble in a speedrunning context. If you find one on the ground, sure, use it, but I would pretty much never go out of my way to buy a bauble from the vendor. So starting in Act 3, you'll have all the quality currencies. Act 1, you'll only get scraps. Act 2, you'll only get whetstones. And taken together, all this information will be helpful to make sure that you don't waste time trying to buy an item that might not be available at a vendor, or if you need to create or complete some currency sort of interaction with the vendor through trading a different currency, you'll know what vendor to go to. So hopefully this video is helpful, and thank you for watching.